Chapter 1. A Dream of Simple Joys. The valley of Willowbrook stretched like a green quilt beneath the sun, its rolling hills peppered with wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Streams glittered as they wove lazily through fields of golden wheat, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender and freshly tilled soil. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly, where the whispers of the wind and the songs of birds made up the town's daily music. Every corner of this serene haven seemed to hold a story, etched into the bark of ancient trees or whispered by the babbling brooks that meandered through the meadows. In a small, weather-worn cottage at the edge of the valley lived a boy named Oliver. Unlike other children in Willowbrook, Oliver did not dream of adventure or heroism. He didn't pretend to be a knight, charging into battle, or a wizard casting mighty spells. His dreams were simpler, rooted in the soil beneath his feet. All Oliver wanted was to be a farmer, just a farmer. To him, there was no greater calling than coaxing life from the earth, no sweeter triumph than seeing his plants thrive under his care. Oliver adored the earth, its richness, its smell, its promise of life. Every morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, Oliver would rise, pull on his patched boots, and grab his straw hat, worn and frayed at the edges. He'd head outside, where his tiny garden waited for him like an old friend. There he would dig, plant, and water, humming tunes his mother used to sing while he worked. Each seed he buried was a promise, a tiny hope he entrusted to the nurturing embrace of the soil. The townsfolk often teased him about his peculiar devotion. "Oliver, lad, you're young," old Mr. Thatcher would call out as he passed by on his cart. "You've got the heart of a knight. Why waste it on dirt?" Oliver would smile politely, wiping his hands on his trousers. "No, sir," he'd reply, "I've got the heart of a farmer," and he meant it. To Oliver, there was magic in the way seeds sprouted, in the quiet rhythm of the seasons. While others sought glory in distant lands, he found his in the first blooms of spring and the golden bounty of harvest time. He often thought of farming as a quiet kind of heroism, a daily labor that brought nourishment and life to the world. One summer morning, as Oliver knelt in his garden planting neat rows of carrots, the world seemed especially bright. The sun hung high in a cloudless sky, and the earth was warm and welcoming beneath his fingers. He was so engrossed in his work that he barely noticed the unusual breeze that swept through the valley. At first, it was faint, a gentle rustle that stirred the leaves. But then it grew stronger, weaving through the trees and fields with an almost musical quality. Oliver paused, his small shovel poised midair. The wind seemed to carry a whisper, faint but unmistakable. Oliver, startled, he glanced around, expecting to see someone nearby. But there was no one. The fields stretched empty around him, their swaying grasses illuminated by the golden light. Shaking his head, Oliver chuckled softly to himself. "Just the wind," he muttered, returning to his work. But the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Oliver, the kingdom needs you." Oliver froze. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood and scanned the horizon. Still no one, just the wind, dancing through the valley as it always had. He tried to dismiss it, brushing off the strange moment as a trick of his imagination. After all, he was no knight, no adventurer. What could the kingdom possibly need from him? That night, Oliver's sleep was restless. The moonlight spilled through his window, bathing his small room in a silvery glow, but it brought no peace. His dreams were vivid and strange, filled with images of a vast, shadowed land. At the center of it all stood a massive tree, its bark cracked and weeping, its roots wrapped in heavy iron chains. The tree's branches stretched skyward as though pleading for freedom, and from its heart came a deep, mournful voice. "Help me, Oliver. Only you can set me free." He woke with a start, his blankets tangled around him. The room was silent, save for the faint chirping of crickets outside. Oliver sat up, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The images from his dream lingered in his mind, vivid and haunting. "It's just a dream," he whispered to himself. "Just a dream." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was stirring. something far beyond the peaceful bounds of Willowbrook. It was as though the dream had planted a seed in his heart, one that refused to be ignored. As he lay back down, staring at the wooden beams of his ceiling, a thought whispered at the edge of his mind. Perhaps, just perhaps, the wind had been right. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Wind. The morning after his strange dream, Oliver awoke to the golden rays of sunlight spilling across his wooden floor. The familiar sound of birds chirping greeted him, and the aroma of dew-kissed earth drifted through his open window. Yet, despite the peaceful setting, he felt an unshakable unease. The dream lingered in his mind like a forgotten melody, its details vivid yet elusive. Dragging himself out of bed, Oliver dressed quickly, his movements slower than usual. He laced up his boots, grabbed his worn straw hat, and stepped outside. The garden waited for him as it always did, a patchwork of greens and browns that never failed to bring him comfort. But today, the sight didn't ease his restless thoughts. As he knelt by his carrots, carefully loosening the soil around their delicate roots, the memory of the dream came rushing back. The massive tree with its cracked bark and pleading branches haunted him, and the voice, so mournful yet commanding, echoed in his mind, "Help me, Oliver. Only you can set me free." What could it mean? He muttered aloud, wiping his brow. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought, but it clung to him like a shadow. By mid-morning, the valley of Willowbrook was alive with its usual hum of activity. Farmers carted bushels of wheat to the market, children darted through the streets chasing one another, and shopkeepers called out cheerful greetings to passers-by. Oliver decided to head into town, hoping the lively atmosphere might distract him from his thoughts. As he walked along the dirt path leading to the village square, the wind picked up again. It was gentle at first, rustling the leaves of the trees that lined the road. But then it grew stronger, tugging at his hat and carrying with it a faint sound, almost like music. He stopped in his tracks, heart pounding. The melody was unlike anything he'd ever heard before, soft and lilting, like the notes of a flute entwined with the rustle of leaves. It seemed to beckon him, pulling at some invisible thread deep within his chest. "Not again," he whispered, turning to look around. The fields stretched empty, the road behind him quiet. But the music persisted, growing clearer with each passing moment. Then came the voice, as soft and insistent as the wind itself. "Oliver, follow." A shiver ran down his spine. He glanced back toward the village, where the comforting bustle of life awaited him. But something inside him, curiosity perhaps, or a quiet sense of duty, urged him to follow the strange call. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted his hat and turned toward the direction of the wind. The path the wind led him down was unfamiliar. It twisted through the hills, past ancient oak trees and forgotten meadows. Oliver's boots crunched against the dry leaves scattered on the ground, and the air grew cooler the farther he went. The sense of unease he'd felt that morning gave way to something else: anticipation. At last, the trail opened into a small clearing. At its center stood an ancient stone well, its surface covered in moss and ivy. The well seemed to hum faintly, as though alive with some unseen energy. Oliver approached it cautiously, his steps slow and deliberate. The moment he reached the well, the wind stopped, leaving the clearing in an eerie silence. Oliver hesitated, unsure of what to do. But before he could turn away, a voice, soft yet commanding, rose from the depths of the well. "You've come, Oliver." He froze. His heart thundered in his chest as he peered into the well's shadowy depths. The voice spoke again, clearer this time, with an almost musical quality. "The land is in peril. A great darkness spreads, unseen by most, but its roots are deep. Only you can bring the light that will set us free." Oliver's mouth went dry. "Me," he stammered. "I'm just a boy, a farmer. You must be mistaken." The voice chuckled softly, a sound that echoed off the stone walls of the well. "It is always the humble who hold the greatest power. The soil you love so dearly holds the secrets of life itself. Trust in your heart, and you will find the strength you need." Before Oliver could respond, the ground beneath him began to tremble. The hum from the well grew louder, filling the air with a deep, resonant sound. A brilliant light erupted from its depths, illuminating the clearing in a golden glow. Oliver shielded his eyes, his breath caught in his throat. When the light faded, the well was silent once more, but something had changed. At his feet lay a small, wooden box, intricately carved with patterns of leaves and vines. Tentatively, Oliver picked it up. It felt warm to the touch, as though pulsing with life. "What is this?" he murmured, running his fingers over the carvings. The voice whispered one final time, its tone filled with both urgency and reassurance. "The journey begins, Oliver. Open the box and you will see." Back in his cottage that evening, Oliver sat at his small wooden table, the box before him. The strange events of the day replayed in his mind as he stared at the object, its carvings glinting in the firelight. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a single seed, no larger than a pebble. It was unlike any seed Oliver had ever seen, its surface shimmering with an iridescent glow. Alongside it was a rolled piece of parchment. Unfurling it, he read the words written in elegant script. "Plant this where the land is weakest. Water it with your hope. Guard it with your courage. From it, a new light will grow." Oliver sat back, the weight of the task sinking in. He was no knight or hero, yet somehow he knew that this seed and the journey it represented was meant for him. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Oliver resolved to see it through, no matter where the path might lead. Tomorrow his journey would begin. Chapter 3. The Seed of Destiny. The morning after Oliver's encounter with the mysterious voice, the sun rose higher than usual, its light feeling warmer, somehow more alive. Yet, despite the brightness of the day, Oliver's heart felt heavy with uncertainty. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was unfolding, something that required him to leave behind the life he had known. His cottage, though humble, had always been a sanctuary of peace. Now, as he sat by the window, looking out over his small garden, the familiar sights of Willowbrook felt distant, like a dream he was slowly waking up from. The box, with its intricate carvings, sat on the table before him, the iridescent seed inside gleaming faintly in the early light. Oliver's fingers brushed the parchment again, the words still fresh in his mind. "Plant this where the land is weakest. Water it with your hope. Guard it with your courage. From it, a new light will grow." The instructions were simple enough, yet their weight was immense. Where could the land be weakest? How could one small seed, planted by a boy who knew only the soil of Willowbrook, change the fate of a kingdom? The wind stirred outside, as if answering his unspoken question, pulling at the edges of his thoughts. The voice in the well had been clear. "Only you can bring the light that will set us free." But what did that truly mean? With a sigh, Oliver stood and walked to the small wooden chest in the corner of his room, pulling out the worn map his father had left behind. It was a map of Willowbrook and the surrounding lands, hand-drawn in faded ink. He spread it out on the table, running his finger over the familiar lines, tracing the paths through the hills and valleys. But his eyes kept straying to the edge of the map, where the lands beyond Willowbrook were barely marked. "Perhaps it's out there," he murmured to himself, "where the land is weakest." A sudden thought seized him, a whisper from his dream, or perhaps a deeper knowing. The massive tree, chained and weeping, had seemed to call to him from the distance. He had seen it in his dream, yes, but now the image felt more real, more urgent. The journey begins. Oliver folded the map with resolve. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but the seed in the box seemed to pulse with an unspoken promise. His purpose was becoming clear, and with that clarity came an unshakable determination. Later that morning, Oliver packed a small satchel with essentials: a flask of water, some dried bread, and a handful of his mother's favorite herbs for good luck. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the garden. His heart ached at the thought of leaving it behind, the plants that had been his companions for so long, the soil he had cultivated with such care. But deep down, he knew he couldn't stay. Not now. Not when the kingdom and the land itself were calling him. As he stepped outside, The wind lifted his hat from his head, a familiar gust that seemed to guide his steps. The wind whispered once more, this time almost like a voice he recognized, as though it were speaking directly to him. Follow the path of the silver oak, and you will find what you seek. The silver oak. Oliver had heard stories of the ancient tree, rumored to be the oldest living thing in the valley. It was said to stand at the edge of the forest, its bark glimmering with a strange, silvery sheen. No one had seen it in years, and the stories had faded into legend. But now, something inside Oliver stirred with a certainty he could not explain. He knew that the path he sought began there. Without another word, he turned and began walking down the familiar road that led to the forest. The wind pushed against his back, and the sun, high above the valley, painted the world in warm hues of gold and amber. Each step took him farther from his cottage and closer to the unknown. As the hours passed, the valley's gentle slopes gave way to the dense woods, the trees towering over him like silent guardians. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the wind became a soft murmur through the branches. Oliver felt as though the land itself were holding its breath, waiting for him to reach his destination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he arrived at the clearing where the silver oak was said to stand. His breath caught in his throat when he saw it. There, bathed in the dappled light that filtered through the canopy, stood the ancient tree. Its bark shimmered with a soft, silvery glow, and its roots seemed to stretch deep into the earth, winding like a living web. Oliver approached the tree cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around it hummed with a strange energy, and as he reached out to touch the bark, he felt a jolt of warmth that traveled through his fingertips and into his very bones. "Welcome, Oliver," came a voice, deep and resonant, echoing from within the tree itself. Startled, Oliver stepped back. Who are you?" The voice was gentle yet firm. "I am the spirit of the silver oak, keeper of the land's heart. You have come seeking answers. What you need is before you." Oliver looked down, and to his amazement, he saw a small patch of earth at the base of the tree, waiting for something. The ground was soft, freshly turned, as though prepared for a seed. With trembling hands, Oliver opened the wooden box and held the glowing seed up to the light. It pulsed once, as though alive, before he gently planted it in the earth beneath the silver oak. As soon as the seed touched the soil, a surge of energy rippled through the clearing, and the tree's silvery bark seemed to shimmer more brightly. A brilliant light erupted from the ground, illuminating the forest in a blinding glow. Oliver shielded his eyes, but he couldn't look away. The ground trembled beneath his feet as the light grew brighter, and for a moment, he thought the entire world might be changing. When the light finally faded, the clearing was silent again. The seed was gone, its presence now a part of the earth itself. But something had shifted. Oliver could feel it deep within his soul. The spirit of the tree spoke once more, its voice full of both warmth and urgency. "You have planted the seed of destiny, Oliver. The journey you have begun will not be easy, but it is the only way to save the kingdom." Oliver stood, heart racing, as the weight of the task ahead settled in. He wasn't just a boy. He was a keeper of life, a protector of the land. And the seed he had planted was only the beginning. With newfound resolve, he turned and made his way back toward Willowbrook, the wind at his back and the promise of a new light in his heart. Chapter 4: The First Trial. Oliver returned to Willowbrook as the first light of evening began to settle over the village. The horizon streaked with soft purples and oranges. The path back had felt endless, but now, standing at the village's edge, he felt the weight of his journey settling in his bones. The seed had been planted, and its glow still lingered in his mind, pulsing with a rhythm of its own. But the real journey, the one that would determine the fate of the kingdom, had just begun. He didn't know where to start. No one would believe him if he told them of the tree, the spirit, or the prophecy. He was just Oliver, the gardener's son. But the voice, the spirit of the silver oak, it had been real, and it had given him a task. And though doubt still gnawed at him, a fire had been lit inside him. He had no choice but to see this through. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of voices ahead. Turning toward the source, he saw a small group of villagers gathered at the square, speaking in hushed tones. Oliver's heart skipped. Among them was someone he had not expected to see: Lena, the blacksmith's daughter. She was standing at the center of the group, her brow furrowed in concern, her fiery red hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Oliver had always admired Lena from a distance. She was strong, resourceful, and known for her sharp mind. More than that, she had a quiet strength that drew people to her, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. As the group dispersed, Lena turned and spotted Oliver. "Oliver," she called, her voice cutting through the evening air. "Wait up." He hesitated for a moment but then walked toward her. She raised an eyebrow, looking him over with a piercing gaze. "You've been gone for hours. Where have you been?" "Just out," Oliver said, trying to sound casual, though the words felt foreign on his tongue. Lena crossed her arms, a skeptical look on her face. "Out? It's not like you to wander off without a word. Something's going on, isn't it?" Oliver hesitated, unsure how much he should reveal. But there was something about Lena's presence, her keen awareness, that made him feel like she could sense more than she let on. I think I'm supposed to do something," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something big. And I don't know what that is yet, but it has to do with the land, with the kingdom." Lena's eyes softened, but she didn't look surprised. "I knew it," she muttered under her breath. She met his eyes, her gaze steady and unflinching. "You've always been different, Oliver. I can see it. There's something about you that's not like the others." Oliver's heart thudded. "What do you mean?" Lena sighed, stepping closer to him. "The others don't see it, but I do. You're not just some gardener's son. You're destined for more. And whatever it is you're supposed to do, I can help." Oliver blinked, confused. "Why would you want to help me?" Lena smiled, a rare, soft expression. "Because, you idiot, I don't think you'll be able to do it alone. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's people being left out in the dark." She paused. "So, what's this about, a trial?" Oliver's breath caught. "How did you know about that?" "I overheard the elders talking," she said with a shrug. "They're all worried about the kingdom, about what's happening beyond Willowbrook's borders. There are whispers of something dark creeping into the land. And it's not just talk. The crops aren't growing as they should. The rivers are running low. People are getting sick. They think it's the land itself that's sick." Oliver swallowed hard. "I think they're right. I planted the seed, but I was told the journey would be filled with trials, that I would need help. I don't know what to do next." Lena's expression softened, her voice gentle. "You've already done more than you think. But this won't be easy. Whatever you've set into motion, the first trial is coming. You'll need to be ready." "Trial?" Oliver's voice quivered. "What do you mean? What kind of trial?" Lena glanced around, lowering her voice. "There's an old legend. The first trial for anyone chosen to restore the land itself will test them. It will throw everything it can at you. You'll have to face it head on. No one knows exactly what it looks like, but it's supposed to be the hardest thing you'll ever face. If you pass it, you'll know you're on the right path." Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of the task ahead was becoming clearer by the second. "But don't worry," Lena added, her tone resolute. "I'll be by your side. I won't let you face this alone." The next day, Oliver and Lena made their way to the edge of the village, where the fields stretched out toward the distant hills. The air was thick with tension, the sense of something impending heavy in the atmosphere. As they approached the old well at the far side of the village, Oliver felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The well, which had always seemed like an ordinary part of the landscape, now felt ominous. The voice from the previous night, the voice that had called him to his destiny, seemed to echo in his mind. "Are you ready?" Lena asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. Oliver nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. He couldn't explain it, but something about this moment felt like the calm before a storm. They stopped by the well, and Oliver felt a strange pull, as if something beneath the earth was calling him. He placed his hand on the stone, and immediately, the air around him shifted. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and a deep, rumbling voice rose from the depths of the well. "Oliver," the voice intoned, its tone deep and foreboding. "You have come as you were called, but do you understand the weight of your journey? Do you know what you must sacrifice?" Oliver's heart raced. "I'm ready," he said, though even to his own ears, his words sounded uncertain. The ground trembled again, this time more violently, and a dark figure began to rise from the well's depths. It was cloaked in shadows, its form barely visible but its presence undeniable. Lena stepped back, pulling out a small dagger from her belt. "Stay close," she warned. "We don't know what this is." Oliver stood his ground, but his legs felt weak. The figure before him was unlike anything he had seen. A manifestation of the land's deepest fears, its darkest fears made flesh. The trial had begun. Chapter 5, The Shadows Test. The figure that rose from the well loomed like a storm, its shape constantly shifting, the darkness swirling and twisting with a life of its own. Oliver's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, staring at the shadowy entity. Lena's hand tightened on the hilt of her dagger, and though her face remained determined, Oliver could see the fear flickering in her eyes. This was not a battle they could fight with blades. The voice that had spoken earlier came again, deep and rumbling, but now it seemed to come from everywhere. "You have come to face the trial, Oliver. But do you truly understand what it means to restore the land? What will you give in exchange for what you seek?" Oliver swallowed hard. "I don't know. I'm not sure what this trial is or what it requires from me. But I can't turn back. The kingdom is dying, and I have to save it." The figure twisted, the shadows drawing closer like tendrils of smoke, swirling around Oliver, threatening to consume him. "Your resolve is admirable, but your understanding is still incomplete. To restore the kingdom, to heal the land, you must first face the darkness within yourself." The shadows stretched out toward him, cold and suffocating. Oliver could feel the weight of the darkness pressing against his chest, threatening to crush him under its force. He staggered back, but the shadows followed, relentless. Lena stepped forward, her voice strong despite the fear creeping into her voice. "You won't be alone, Oliver. We'll face this together." The shadowed figure paused, as if considering Lena's words. Then it spoke again, its voice now cold and mocking. "This trial is not for her. It is for you alone, Oliver. She cannot help you. You must face your fears, your doubts, your regrets. All of it. Only then will you understand what must be done." Oliver closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the shadows closing in on him. His mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts and memories crashing through him. He had always been the gardener's son, small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He had never been meant for greatness. He had never been the hero, but the spirit of the silver oak had called him. And now this shadow demanded something from him. But what? Face the darkness within, the figure growled, its voice now like a distant thunderclap. "Embrace your failures, your insecurities. Only then will you be ready to move forward." Oliver felt a cold shiver run down his spine. His failures, his insecurities, they were there, buried deep in his heart, in the quiet corners of his mind. He had always been afraid that he wasn't good enough, that he wasn't worthy of anything greater than the small life he had lived. He wasn't a hero. He was just a boy with too many doubts and not enough courage. But as the shadows pressed in on him, something inside him stirred, a flicker of defiance, a spark of something greater than fear. "No," Oliver whispered, his voice trembling but growing stronger. "I won't be controlled by my fear. I won't let doubt decide my fate." The shadows hesitated, as if confused by his defiance. Lena, watching closely, spoke softly, though her voice was filled with a growing sense of urgency. "You have the strength, Oliver. You've always had it. You just need to believe it." Oliver clenched his fists, the pulse of the seed he had planted in his mind growing brighter. The silver oak spirit had given him a choice. It hadn't just chosen him for his courage or his strength. It had chosen him because of what he could become. The doubts, the fears, they were part of him, but they didn't define him. "I am not afraid anymore," he said, louder now, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "I will face this darkness, and I will not let it break me." The shadows recoiled, as if struck by the force of his words. For a moment, the world fell silent, the weight of the trial pressing in on them both. Then the shadowed figure spoke once more, this time with a deep, rumbling approval. "You have faced the first trial, Oliver. You have confronted the darkness within yourself and emerged stronger. But remember, this is only the beginning. The land will continue to test you, and your journey will not be easy. But if you hold true to your heart, you may yet succeed." The darkness began to dissipate, its form unraveling into thin wisps that vanished into the air, leaving behind a calm stillness. The oppressive weight lifted, and the sky above, which had been clouded with shadows, began to clear. Lena stepped forward, her hand resting gently on Oliver's shoulder. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "You faced it, and you didn't let it win." Oliver nodded, but inside, he felt a tremor of uncertainty. The trial had been only a glimpse into what lay ahead, and he knew there would be more. Much more. He had faced the darkness within himself, but that was just the beginning. The kingdom still needed him, and he had no idea what the next test would be. But for the first time, he felt like he might be ready for it. "We're not done yet," he said quietly, his voice firm with determination. "There's more to come, and I won't stop until it's fixed." Lena smiled, her eyes sparkling with renewed confidence. "Neither will I. We'll face this together, Oliver." As they turned to leave the well, the sun had finally dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. It was a quiet night, but Oliver knew that everything had changed. The first trial had been completed, and though the path ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: he was no longer just Oliver, the gardener's son. He was someone greater, someone who could save the kingdom, and with Lena by his side, he would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together. Chapter 6. The Shifting Path. The journey to the next trial was long, and with each step, Oliver felt a growing weight upon his shoulders. Though the air was cool and crisp, a sense of unease lingered in the back of his mind. The shadows of the well had tested his inner fears, but as they left the sacred grounds behind, the land seemed quieter, more still than ever before. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. Lena walked beside him, her steps sure and steady, but Oliver could see the faint lines of worry etched on her face. It wasn't just the trial they had faced. It was the unknown future that lay ahead. The land seemed to pulse with a deep, quiet magic, and yet, there was something unsettling about it. "Do you think the trials will get harder?" Oliver asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "They could. The trials are meant to challenge not just your strength but your heart. And they are never what you expect." Her gaze shifted forward, as if considering the path ahead. "But we've made it through one. You faced the darkness inside yourself. And that's no small feat." Oliver nodded, trying to steady his breathing. But the weight in his chest didn't lift. Instead, it seemed to grow with every step. What was the next trial going to be? And how would he face it? As they walked, the dense forest around them began to thin. The towering trees, once close together, spread out to reveal an open clearing, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. In the center of the clearing stood a solitary stone pillar, covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly in the dark. "That's the second trial," Lena said, her voice tinged with awe. She walked ahead, her boots crunching softly against the earth. "I've heard of these trials before. They test your spirit and your ability to adapt. The next trial is one of change." Oliver approached the pillar, his fingers brushing the glowing runes. The moment his skin touched the stone, a surge of energy pulsed through him, and a voice filled the air, loud, commanding, yet strangely soothing. "Oliver, son of the gardener, your next challenge awaits. Step forward, for the trial of change begins." The ground beneath them rumbled, and the clearing before them began to shift. Trees began to grow in reverse, their branches twisting and turning into the sky. The stone pillar cracked open, revealing a swirling vortex of light. And then, as if the world itself were folding inward, the landscape transformed. The once peaceful clearing morphed into a chaotic, constantly changing maze of pathways, twisting roads, towering walls, and shifting shadows. Lena didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the vortex. This is it, Oliver. We have to follow the path. No matter how it changes. Oliver nodded, but his heart raced. The air felt charged with energy, as though the very landscape was alive and unpredictable. Every step they took seemed to shift the ground beneath their feet. The once calm clearing now felt like a labyrinth with no clear way out. And every time they thought they were heading in the right direction, the path would change again, forcing them to rethink their every move. We can't stand still, Lena murmured. We have to keep moving forward, even when we don't know where we're going. Oliver swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had always been a person who liked things predictable, steady. But this trial was different. It wasn't just about facing an enemy. It was about accepting change, embracing the uncertainty of life. With Lena by his side, they moved through the maze, the paths shifting around them, the walls rising and falling with each step. There were moments of doubt, moments where the way ahead seemed impossible. But each time, Lena's steady presence gave him the courage to keep going. They rounded a corner only to find the path split into 3 directions. Each one seemed to lead into a different unknown, and for a moment, Oliver hesitated, unsure of which way to take. The air was thick with tension, and the glow of the runes on the stone pillar now seemed far away, a distant beacon in the shifting chaos. How do we choose? Oliver asked, his voice shaky. Lena looked at the paths, her eyes narrowing as if searching for something hidden. Sometimes there's no right choice, Oliver. Sometimes you just have to pick one and trust that it will lead you where you need to go. Oliver took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, but Lena was right. In this trial, there was no perfect way forward. He had to accept the uncertainty and trust that his instincts would guide him. With a firm resolve, Oliver stepped toward the middle path, his hand gripping the hilt of his dagger as he moved forward. The path began to twist and turn even more rapidly, the walls of the maze growing taller, the ground shifting beneath their feet like a moving ocean. Oliver could feel his heart racing as the pressure to make the right choices mounted. But as they pressed on, he began to realize something. This trial wasn't about finding the perfect path or the right answer. It was about accepting change and learning to adapt, learning to trust himself and Lena, to keep moving forward even when the way ahead wasn't clear. And as they turned another corner, the maze suddenly began to fade. The walls melted away, and before them stood the stone pillar, unchanged, standing tall in the center of the clearing. The glowing runes pulsed one last time, and the voice echoed once more. Well done, Oliver. You have passed the trial of change. Oliver exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the trial lift off his chest. Lena was already beside him, her expression one of quiet pride. You did it, she said softly. We made it through. Oliver nodded, though his mind was still spinning from the shifting maze. It wasn't just me. We did it together. You were right. Sometimes you just have to trust the path even when it's unclear. Lena smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made the stars above seem even brighter. And we'll keep doing that, one step at a time. As they stood there in the clearing, the winds began to settle, the maze now fully faded. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, peaceful once again. But Oliver knew that the trials were far from over. The kingdom still needed him, and there would be more challenges ahead. But with each trial, he was learning. And with Lena by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. Chapter 7: The Echoes of the Past. The sun had barely begun to rise as Oliver and Lena stood at the foot of a mountain. The towering peaks loomed ahead, their tops shrouded in mist, and the silence of the morning was almost deafening. This place, though quiet, felt ancient, like the land itself had a memory that stretched back centuries. Oliver could feel it in the air, thick with the weight of untold stories. "This is where the third trial lies," Lena said, her voice soft but resolute. "The trial of memory." Oliver frowned. "What does that mean? A trial of memory?" Lena looked at him, her gaze distant as if she, too, was reliving a past she didn't speak of. "It's a trial where you confront the echoes of your past. Both the things you've forgotten and the things you wish you could forget. We all have memories, some painful, some joyous, but they are the threads that weave us into who we are. This trial will force you to face them all." Oliver took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what kind of memories he had buried deep within him, but the thought of revisiting the past made his stomach churn. Still, he couldn't back away now. Not after everything they had been through. They began to climb the mountain, the path narrow and winding. The air grew colder as they ascended, and the sound of their footsteps was swallowed by the vast emptiness around them. They didn't speak much, each lost in their own thoughts as the mountain seemed to stretch endlessly upward. After what felt like hours, they reached a plateau, a flat area surrounded by jagged cliffs on all sides. At the center of the plateau stood an altar of sorts, a stone slab covered in strange markings, and above it, a single beam of light filtered through the clouds, illuminating the altar like a spotlight. Lena stood back, watching as Oliver approached the altar, his heart thudding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the trial pressing down on him, the air thick with anticipation. The stone was cold beneath his fingertips as he touched the altar, and in that instant, everything around him seemed to shift. The world blurred, and before he could react, memories began to flood his mind. He was no longer standing on the mountain plateau. Instead, he was in a small cottage, surrounded by the soft smell of flowers and fresh bread. He could hear the gentle crackle of a fire and the soft murmur of voices. His mother's voice, his father's laugh. "Oliver," his mother's voice called out to him. "Come inside, my son. It's time for supper." He turned toward the door, but before he could step through, everything changed again. He was a boy, running through a field of tall grass, laughing as the sun warmed his face. His friends were with him, and for a moment he felt the joy of carefree childhood. But as he ran, the world began to darken, the sun vanishing behind clouds. The laughter of his friends faded, and he felt a cold, creeping fear settle in his chest. "Where are they?" he whispered. "Where did they go?" The field stretched endlessly, the tall grass now an oppressive sea, swallowing everything around him. He ran faster, his heart racing, but no matter how far he went, he could never find his friends. The emptiness grew deeper, more suffocating. Then, once again, the scene changed. Oliver was older now, standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking a dark, turbulent sea. The winds howled, and the waves crashed violently against the rocks below. He could feel the anger, the pain, the confusion that had filled his heart at that moment. There was a battle in his chest, a decision that had to be made, something that had torn him apart, a choice he couldn't take back. "You have to let go," a voice whispered in the wind. "You have to let go." Oliver didn't know whose voice it was, but the words haunted him, lingering like a shadow he couldn't escape. He turned away from the cliff, but the darkness followed him. "Oliver, remember who you are." A sudden rush of images filled his mind. Faces, voices, places he had long forgotten. Some he wanted to forget, others he cherished deeply. His parents, their laughter, his childhood friends, the moments that defined his early life. But then there were darker memories, regrets, mistakes, things he had buried deep in the recesses of his mind. The memories blurred together, and Oliver collapsed to his knees on the stone altar. He could feel the weight of them all, crashing over him like an unstoppable tide. The joy, the sorrow, the anger, and the grief. It was all too much. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You're not alone." Lena's voice broke through the haze of his mind, steady and grounding. "Face them, Oliver. They're part of you, but they don't define you." Her words were like a beacon in the darkness. Slowly, he gathered his strength and lifted his head. The images began to fade, one by one, like smoke drifting away on the wind. But even as the memories cleared, they left something behind, a deeper understanding. Lena stepped forward, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. You don't have to carry them all. You can choose which ones to hold onto and which ones to let go. Oliver took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with clarity. The weight in his chest seemed to lift, and the world around him felt steady again. He wasn't just his memories. He was who he chose to be, and the past, no matter how painful, didn't have to control his future. I'm ready, he said quietly, standing tall once more. The voice echoed again, this time gentle and approving. Well done, Oliver. You have passed the trial of memory. The stone beneath his hands warmed, the altar's glow fading as the mountain plateau returned to its quiet stillness. The memories, once overwhelming, were now a part of him, but they no longer ruled him. The trial was over. Oliver turned to Lena, who smiled at him with a warmth that spoke volumes. You did it, she said softly. He nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in days. I did, and I couldn't have done it without you. Together, they turned back toward the path that awaited them, knowing that their journey wasn't over. More trials lay ahead, each one challenging them in ways they couldn't predict. But Oliver had learned something important in the trial of memory, that he had the power to shape his future, no matter the past. And with Lena by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 8, The Shifting Shadows. The journey had taken them farther than either of them had expected. From the mountain trials to the deep forests, and now, they found themselves standing at the entrance of a dense, shadowy valley. The trees stood tall and twisted, their branches weaving together in a canopy so thick that it seemed to block out the very sky. The air here was heavy, laden with an eerie stillness that felt unsettling. The path before them was narrow, winding through the heart of the valley, and the ground was slick with a layer of mist that never seemed to dissipate. Lena paused at the edge of the valley, her eyes narrowing. This is the trial of shadows. Oliver glanced at her, his brow furrowed. The trial of shadows? What does that mean? It means facing everything you've avoided, the parts of yourself you've hidden, the fears you've never confronted, the darkness within you that you've kept locked away. Her voice was quiet but firm, as if she were speaking from experience. In this place, the shadows don't just hide in the corners. They're alive. They will twist and distort everything you've ever known about yourself. Oliver took a step back, his heart pounding. The weight of her words pressed down on him, making the valley feel even darker. He wasn't afraid of the trials. They were something he had expected, something he had been prepared for. But the trial of shadows felt different. It wasn't just about overcoming an external challenge. It was about confronting his inner demons, the fears he had buried deep inside, the things he didn't want to face. Lena turned toward the valley, her expression resolute. We can do this. We've made it this far, and the shadows can only have power over us if we let them. With a deep breath, Oliver nodded, following her into the valley. As they stepped onto the path, the temperature seemed to drop, the air thick with an unnatural chill. The mist swirled around their feet, and the trees above groaned as though they were alive, watching their every move. For a moment, everything felt still, but Oliver could feel the tension building, the sense of something lurking just beyond his vision. The deeper they ventured, the darker it became. The shadows stretched longer, twisting in impossible ways, distorting the world around them. The path grew narrower, the trees pressing in on them, their gnarled roots reaching out like fingers. It was as though the very earth beneath their feet was trying to swallow them whole. Suddenly, Oliver heard a faint sound, whispers, barely audible at first. Then, more voices growing louder, more distinct. Oliver, one voice called, its tone low and familiar. You've always been weak. Oliver froze, his heart skipping a beat. The voice was unmistakable. It was his own. No, he muttered under his breath, his hands clenching into fists. This is just the trial. It's not real. But the voice persisted. You've always been afraid. You run from your fears, from the truth. You're not strong enough to face them. You never will be. Lena's voice broke through the cacophony of whispers. Don't listen to it, Oliver. It's not real. These are just the shadows trying to get inside your head. But the voice didn't stop. It echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing moment. You failed before. You'll fail again. Oliver gritted his teeth, the sting of the words cutting deeper than he cared to admit. His past failures, the mistakes he'd made, the times he'd fallen short, flooded his mind. The doubt, the guilt, the shame that he had tried so hard to bury resurfaced like a tidal wave. And then, another voice joined in. You'll never be good enough for her. You'll never be the hero they expect you to be. Oliver's breath hitched. He could hear Lena's footsteps behind him. But the voice, this new voice, was like a knife to his heart. The weight of her expectations, the pressure to be someone he couldn't quite reach, flooded his chest. It was true. He wasn't who she needed him to be. He wasn't ready. He was just a man, a flawed, imperfect man. Oliver, Lena's voice again, softer this time. Remember who you are. You are not your doubts. But the whispers grew louder, merging into a single voice that rang in his ears, drowning out everything else. You're nothing, the voice sneered. You'll never be enough. Oliver stumbled, his vision blurring, his knees weak beneath him. The shadows seemed to stretch around him, swallowing the light. The world felt heavy, suffocating. The fears he had spent his entire life trying to escape were here, right in front of him. He wanted to run. He wanted to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows were everywhere. They were inside him. Oliver, Lena's voice pierced the darkness again, more urgent this time. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward her. You don't have to face this alone. I'm here. We're in this together. For a moment, the voices stopped. The shadows parted, just enough for Oliver to see Lena's face, her eyes full of determination. She didn't see the brokenness he felt. She saw the strength within him, the person he had yet to realize he could be. And in that moment, something inside Oliver clicked. The shadows didn't define him. The doubts, the fears, the guilt, they were all part of him, yes, but they didn't have to control him. He had the power to choose who he wanted to be. He could face the darkness within and still walk in the light. With Lena by his side, he could do it. He wasn't alone. Oliver took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the trial lifting. The shadows still loomed around them, but they no longer seemed so daunting. They were just shadows, flickers of doubt, projections of fear. And he was stronger than they were. He straightened, meeting Lena's gaze. Let's finish this. Together, they continued down the path, the shadows no longer holding the same power over them. With each step, the darkness receded, and the light returned, stronger than before. The trial of shadows had not been about defeating an enemy outside of himself. It had been about understanding that the greatest battles were the ones fought within. And as they emerged from the valley, the weight on Oliver's heart had lifted, replaced by something new, a quiet strength that he had never known he possessed. The trial was over, but the journey, it seemed, was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Unseen Hand. The sky above was a deep, swirling shade of violet, the sun hidden behind clouds that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The landscape had changed since they left the Valley of Shadows. Instead of the oppressive darkness, they found themselves standing at the edge of a vast desert, the wind kicking up swirling gusts of sand that stung their skin. Ahead, an oasis shimmered like a mirage, but something about it felt off. Lena squinted at the horizon, her hand shielding her eyes. The trial of perception, she murmured, more to herself than to Oliver. Oliver wiped the sand from his brow. What does that mean? What are we supposed to do here? Lena didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared ahead, lost in thought. This trial is about understanding the difference between what we see and what is truly there. Our perceptions can be deceiving, and the truth is often hidden beneath layers of illusion. The oasis we see may not be what it seems. How do we know what's real then? Lena turned to him, her eyes steady. We don't always. We have to rely on what we've learned, what we've experienced, and trust that the truth will reveal itself in time. Oliver wasn't sure if he believed her. After everything they'd been through, he had grown to trust her. But the desert stretched before them, barren and empty, with nothing but the distant glimmer of the oasis to guide them. He felt the weight of uncertainty settle over him once more. They began walking toward the shimmering water, the heat of the sun pressing down on them, each step sinking into the sand. The oasis seemed to move farther away the closer they got, as if it were always just out of reach, its reflection rippling in the air like a trick of the light. After what felt like hours, the landscape around them began to change. The air grew thick with tension, and the sand shifted beneath their feet. Oliver looked around, his senses on edge. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice tight. Lena nodded slowly. "This is where it begins. The trial of perception isn't just about seeing the world differently. It's about understanding how we've been shaped by our own experiences and biases. What we think we know isn't always the truth." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The sand began to swirl around their feet, rising into a whirlwind that seemed to consume everything in its path. The oasis vanished from sight, and the world around them distorted, like looking through a cracked mirror. Lena grabbed Oliver's arm. "Stay focused. Don't let the illusion pull you in." Oliver's heart raced. The wind howled, and the world seemed to bend in on itself. He saw fleeting images, glimpses of people he knew, faces from his past, memories he had buried. The more he tried to focus on them, the more they twisted, becoming unrecognizable. His mind struggled to make sense of it all. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise, but the visions didn't stop. They grew more intense, more chaotic, each one vying for his attention. "Oliver," Lena's voice broke through the whirlwind, sharp and clear. "Don't lose yourself in the illusions. Look at what's real." He opened his eyes, but everything around him was still shifting. The sand, the wind, the mirages, they were all part of the trial, part of the challenge to test his perception. He could no longer trust what he saw. The desert wasn't a desert. The oasis wasn't an oasis. It was all an illusion, designed to confuse him. In the distance, Oliver saw a figure, vague, shrouded in mist. The figure was walking toward him, its movements slow and deliberate. As it came closer, the image grew sharper, and Oliver could make out its features. It was him. The figure was a distorted reflection of himself, its eyes hollow and dark, its face twisted in a silent scream. The sight made his stomach churn. "Not again," Oliver whispered, backing away. But the figure kept coming, its presence suffocating, overwhelming. "You can't escape yourself," the distorted version of him spoke, its voice a low, guttural echo. "Stop," Oliver cried, his hands reaching out as if to push the figure away, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it mirrored his movements, its eyes never leaving his. "Don't you see?" the figure taunted. "You are your own worst enemy. You've always been afraid of what's inside you, the lies you've told yourself, the guilt you've carried, the shame. You'll never escape it." Oliver's breath quickened, the words cutting deeper than any blade. He had tried so hard to bury these feelings, to outrun them, but here they were in the heart of the desert, staring him in the face. Lena stepped forward, standing between him and the distorted reflection. "That's not you, Oliver," she said firmly. "This is part of the illusion, part of the trial. Your doubts don't define you." The figure faltered for a moment, its form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. But it didn't disappear. It still loomed over them, its presence heavy. Oliver could feel the weight of the words pressing against his chest. The illusion was powerful, but he knew now that it wasn't real. The fear, the guilt, it had always been an illusion, a creation of his mind. It didn't define him, and it didn't have power over him unless he allowed it to. He took a deep breath, pushing past the figure. "I am not what I feared. I am not my past." The figure trembled, its image rippling like water disturbed by a stone. For a moment, it seemed as if the whole world around him was on the verge of shattering. And then, in an instant, everything stopped. The wind died down, the sand settled, the illusions evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing but the quiet, still desert. Oliver stood there, breathing heavily, his heart racing. The oasis had returned, no longer shimmering, no longer an illusion. It was real now. The trial was over. Lena turned to him, her face softening with a reassuring smile. "You did it." Oliver looked around at the landscape, feeling the weight of the trial lift from his shoulders. "I didn't let it control me," he said, more to himself than to her. Lena nodded. "Exactly. Perception is everything. What you see isn't always the truth. Sometimes you have to look beyond the surface, beyond the illusions, to find what's real." Together, they walked toward the oasis, each step lighter than the last. The trial had shown Oliver that perception was a powerful thing, and that he could reshape his own reality if he trusted in himself and the strength he had inside. The desert no longer seemed so barren. The oasis wasn't just a mirage. It was a symbol of the truth he had uncovered. And as they reached the water's edge, Oliver knew that this was just one of many trials that would challenge them. But with each one, they would grow stronger, wiser, and closer to the truth that lay ahead. Chapter 10. The Path Forward. The stillness of the oasis surrounded them as they sat on the cool stones by the water's edge, its surface reflecting the violet sky above. The events of the trial of perception seemed distant now, like a dream that faded with the first light of dawn. But the lessons learned remained, etched into Oliver's mind like a fresh scar. Lena sat beside him, her eyes focused on the calm water, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns in the sand. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a bond forged in the fire of shared trials. "I thought I was going to lose myself in there," Oliver admitted, his voice low. "I kept seeing everything I feared the most. My guilt, my doubts, my regrets. It was overwhelming." Lena turned to him, her expression gentle but serious. "That's the danger of this journey, Oliver. The trials aren't just external. They force you to confront the things you've been running from inside yourself. The only way to move forward is to face them head-on." Oliver nodded, his fingers curling into his palms as the weight of her words settled on him. I think I'm ready to keep going." "Good," she said, her tone firm. "We have to. The path ahead won't get easier. There are more trials to face, more illusions to uncover. But with each one, we'll grow stronger." Oliver looked out over the water, watching the ripples distort the reflection of the sky. For a moment, he felt the pull of something beyond himself, something vast and ancient. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was as if the desert itself was calling to him, urging him forward. Lena followed his gaze, sensing the shift in his focus. "The next trial is ahead," she said quietly, her voice carrying a trace of anticipation. "We're not done yet." Oliver stood up, the sand shifting beneath his feet. "What do we have to do?" Lena's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Oliver saw a flicker of something like fear in her expression. "This next trial, it's not like the others. It's not just about perception. It's about trust. Trust. Yes, trust in yourself. Trust in the choices you make. And most importantly, trust in the journey. The next trial will test your ability to follow the path even when you can't see where it leads. It will ask you to surrender your doubts and place your faith in something greater than yourself." Oliver furrowed his brow. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," Lena agreed, "but it's necessary. The journey we're on isn't just about the destination. It's about the person you become along the way." Oliver took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had faced his fears, conquered his doubts, but trusting in the unknown, in something beyond his understanding, felt like an impossible leap. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. "Do you trust me?" Lena asked, her voice breaking through his thoughts. He looked at her, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Yes." "Then trust the path we're on," she said softly. "We don't have to know everything. We just have to keep moving forward, step by step." Oliver's heart beat faster, the weight of her words settling into his bones. There was so much ahead, so many unknowns, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. Let's do this. With one last glance at the oasis, they turned and began to walk. The landscape around them shifted again, the oasis vanishing as the desert began to change. The sand turned to stone beneath their feet, the sky darkening as they moved deeper into the unknown. As they walked, the air grew heavy, and the ground trembled beneath them. Oliver felt a pull in his chest, an undeniable force that seemed to beckon them forward. He didn't know what awaited them, but he could feel the pull of something much bigger than himself. Lena remained silent beside him, her presence a steady anchor as they walked. The wind picked up, whispering secrets in a language Oliver couldn't understand. The landscape twisted and shifted, but no matter how much the world around them changed, they pressed on. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of a vast chasm, the darkness beyond it stretching into infinity. A rickety bridge of twisted vines and weathered wood spanned the gap, swaying in the wind. "This is it," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The trial of trust." Oliver stared at the bridge, his stomach lurching. It was narrow, unstable, and looked like it could collapse with the slightest movement. The darkness beyond seemed to stretch on forever, and he felt a rush of fear. "I have to cross that?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "You do," Lena said, her eyes unwavering. "You have to trust that it will hold. You have to trust that the path will guide you, even when it seems impossible." Oliver took a hesitant step forward, his heart pounding. The bridge seemed to sway even more with his movement, and he instinctively took a step back. His mind raced, filled with doubts. What if the bridge wasn't stable? What if he fell? What if he wasn't strong enough? Lena turned to him, her gaze steady. "Remember the lessons you've learned. Trust in yourself. Trust that you've come this far for a reason. You can do this." Oliver looked at her, then at the bridge. He didn't know how, but he knew she was right. The path ahead was unclear, but he couldn't stay here, frozen by his fears. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward once more, placing one foot on the bridge. The wood creaked beneath his weight, but it held steady. He took another step, then another until he was halfway across. The darkness below him seemed to reach up, but he kept his focus on the path ahead, trusting that he could make it. And as he reached the other side, his heart still racing, he felt something shift inside of him. The weight of his doubts had lifted, and in their place was a new understanding. A realization that trust wasn't just about the things he could see or control. It was about having faith in the unseen forces that guided him. Lena stood at the edge of the chasm, watching him with a knowing smile. "You did it." Oliver turned to face her, his breath heavy but steady. "I did." They stood there for a moment, taking in the vastness of the world before them. The journey was far from over, but with each step, they were closer to uncovering the truth that lay beyond the horizon. Together, they continued onward, trusting the path, trusting each other, and trusting that the trials they faced would lead them to something greater than they could have ever imagined. Chapter 11: The Trial of Reflection. The wind had picked up again as they ventured deeper into the unknown, and the desert silence was interrupted only by the soft crunch of their footsteps in the sand. They had crossed the chasm, and though Oliver's heart still pounded from the weight of the trial of trust, he felt a new sense of resolve. The unknown no longer felt as frightening. He had taken that first step into uncertainty and survived. As they walked, the air grew heavier, cooler, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. There was a feeling of something approaching, an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Oliver glanced at Lena, who walked beside him with the same calm, unruffled composure. She hadn't said a word since they crossed the bridge, but Oliver knew she was attuned to the same change in the air. Eventually, they reached a large, open clearing, and at its center stood a tall, ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like twisted hands. The tree appeared to shimmer faintly, as though it were bathed in a silver light, despite the fact that the sky above them was still darkening into night. "This is it," Lena said softly, her voice a murmur against the wind. "The trial of reflection," Oliver said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. He already knew. Lena nodded, her eyes fixed on the tree. This is where we face what we've been avoiding, Oliver. The truths we've buried deep inside. The things we've been afraid to acknowledge. It's time to confront them. Oliver swallowed hard. His mind raced with the implications. The trials so far had tested his strength, his perception, his trust, but this one felt different. This one was about facing the person he had been running from, the person he had become over the years, the person he had yet to understand fully. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted, his voice thick with uncertainty. "You don't need to be," Lena replied. "Readiness comes in the facing, not the preparation. You can't run from yourself forever. This trial will force you to see what's hidden in your heart. And once you do, you can choose how to move forward." The wind seemed to die down as they approached the tree, and as they did, Oliver felt a strange sensation in his chest, as though something inside him was pulling him closer. His legs felt heavy, but his feet moved forward, almost of their own accord. When they reached the base of the tree, Lena turned to him. "This is the point of no return," she said quietly. "Once we begin, there's no turning back until we've faced what's waiting for us." Oliver looked up at the tree. Its bark was dark and weathered, and there was a hollow at its base, a small opening just large enough for a person to enter. It seemed as though the tree itself was inviting them inside. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what was ahead. "Let's do it." Lena stepped forward first, her movements fluid and confident. Oliver followed her, and together, they crouched down and entered the hollow. Inside, the air was cool and damp, and the space was dimly lit by an ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the tree. In the center of the hollow stood a reflective pool of water. But this was no ordinary water. It was still, almost unnaturally so, and its surface gleamed like glass. Oliver could see his own reflection in it, but there was something unsettling about it, as if his reflection was not quite his own. It shifted, distorted, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw another version of himself. A version that was older, wearier, and filled with regret. Lena stepped closer to the pool, her face serene. She gazed into the water, her eyes unfocused. "The reflection you see isn't just the person you are now," she said. "It's a glimpse of who you could be, who you might become, and who you've left behind. This trial will show you the full picture." Oliver stepped up to the pool, his breath shallow. His reflection rippled, shifting with the faintest movement of the water. As he gazed into it, the image changed. He saw himself as a child again, his face innocent and unburdened by the weight of the world. But then, the image twisted, and he saw himself at different stages of his life, each one marked by pain, loss, and choices he regretted. The face that stared back at him seemed to become more and more unfamiliar with each passing moment. "What is this?" he whispered. "Why is it showing me this?" "Because it's part of who you are," Lena said softly, her voice carrying a weight of understanding. "This is your journey. The choices you've made, the paths you've taken, they all led you here. You can't change the past, but you can learn from it. This trial isn't about judgment. It's about understanding." Oliver's reflection began to change again. This time, it showed him the person he had tried to become, the person he had always imagined he would be. He saw himself succeeding, achieving his dreams, but the image was tinged with a shadow of emptiness. He had reached his goals, but at what cost? He saw friends he had left behind, moments he had missed, and opportunities he had let slip away. "Is this who I am?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lena's eyes were steady as she looked at him. "It's a part of who you are, but it doesn't define you. You get to choose what comes next." Oliver stared at the reflection, the confusion and doubts swirling inside him. The faces, the moments, the paths, it was all too much to process. How could he reconcile all these versions of himself? How could he accept the mistakes he had made, the pain he had caused, the dreams that had slipped through his fingers? "It's not about erasing the past," Lena said, reading his thoughts. "It's about accepting it. When you face who you are, you give yourself the power to change, to move forward." Oliver took a deep breath. The weight in his chest was still there, but it was no longer unbearable. He could feel the first stirrings of understanding within himself. The past didn't define him, but it had shaped him. And it wasn't too late to shape the future. With a steady hand, he reached down and touched the surface of the pool. The reflection rippled under his touch, and for the first time, it felt like he was in control. He could feel his heart calm, his mind clear, and the path ahead opening up before him. "I'm ready," he said quietly. Lena smiled, the weight of the trial lifting from her shoulders as well. "Then let's go. The path forward is waiting." Together, they turned away from the pool and exited the hollow of the tree. The desert lay ahead, vast and endless, but Oliver no longer felt overwhelmed by it. He had faced his reflection, accepted the pieces of himself that were difficult to look at, and now he was ready to move forward, stronger and more certain than ever before. The trial of reflection was complete, but the journey was far from over. Chapter 12, The Keeper of Knowledge. As the silver glow of the ancient tree faded behind them, Oliver and Lena pressed forward, the landscape around them shifting once again. The endless desert gave way to rugged hills and jagged peaks, the ground beneath their feet transitioning from soft sand to hardened stone. The air was cooler here, tinged with the faint scent of pine, though there were no trees in sight. For the first time since they began their journey, a faint structure appeared on the horizon. It was a tower, spiraling upward like a needle piercing the sky. Its surface gleamed with an otherworldly light, its edges too perfect, too sharp, to be the work of time or nature. "That's it," Lena said, her voice quiet but resolute. "The Tower of Knowledge." Oliver squinted at the distant spire. "Knowledge? What kind of knowledge?" Lena gave him a sidelong glance. "The kind that answers questions and raises others. The kind that reveals truths, both about the world and about yourself. But it comes with a price." "A price?" Oliver asked, his stomach nodding. Lena nodded. "Not all knowledge is easy to bear, Oliver. Sometimes, knowing too much can be as heavy a burden as knowing too little." They walked in silence toward the tower, its imposing form growing larger with each step. When they finally reached its base, Oliver saw that its surface was smooth and reflective, like polished obsidian, yet it radiated a warmth that seemed to invite them closer. At the base of the tower was an arched doorway, its frame inscribed with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and shimmer when he looked directly at them. The door itself was ajar, revealing a staircase spiraling upward into darkness. "Ready?" Lena asked, her voice steady. Oliver took a deep breath. "Ready as I'll ever be." They stepped through the doorway, the air inside cool and still. The staircase was wide enough for them to ascend side by side, and as they climbed, a faint light began to illuminate the steps ahead. It wasn't long before they reached the first landing, where a large, circular chamber awaited them. The walls were lined with shelves, each crammed with books, scrolls, and strange artifacts that seemed to hum with energy. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it rested an open book. The pages were blank, but as Oliver approached, words began to materialize on the surface, written in a language he didn't recognize. "This is the trial of knowledge," Lena said, her tone reverent. "The keeper will test you here. You'll be asked to seek answers, but the questions may not be the ones you expect." As if on cue, the air in the room grew heavy, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was cloaked in flowing robes of deep indigo, its face obscured by a hood. In one hand, it held a staff topped with a glowing crystal, and its voice, when it spoke, was deep and resonant, as though it echoed from the walls themselves. "Seeker," the figure intoned, its gaze fixed on Oliver. "You have come to the Tower of Knowledge, but knowledge is not given freely. To earn it, you must answer 3 questions. Each will challenge you in a different way. Are you prepared to face the truth, even if it is not the truth you wish to hear?" Oliver hesitated. The weight of the keeper's words settled on him, but he nodded. "I'm ready." The keeper raised its staff, and the crystal atop it flared brightly. The room around them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a void of swirling colors. Oliver and Lena stood alone with the keeper, their surroundings shifting with every pulse of the staff's light. The keeper's first question echoed through the void. "What is it you seek most in this journey, And why? Oliver opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He hadn't expected the question to turn inward so quickly. After a moment of reflection, he said, "I seek understanding of myself, of the world, of why I've been chosen for this journey. I want to know my purpose." The keeper regarded him silently before speaking again. Understanding is a noble pursuit, but it often leads to more questions than answers. Will you accept that what you find may never satisfy you? Oliver hesitated, then nodded. If it means moving forward, I'll accept it. The light of the staff pulsed again, and the second question came. What is the greatest mistake you've made, and how has it shaped you? Oliver felt his chest tighten. The memories he had seen in the trial of reflection resurfaced, each one sharper and more painful than before. He thought of the choices he had made, the people he had hurt, and the opportunities he had squandered. My greatest mistake, he said finally, his voice trembling, was letting fear control me. I've pushed people away, avoided challenges, and run from the truth because I was afraid of failing. But it's also shown me that I don't want to live that way anymore. I want to face my fears and grow stronger. The keeper's staff flared brighter, and the final question echoed. If you had the power to change one thing, about the world, about yourself, what would it be, and why? Oliver's mind raced. There were so many things he wished he could change, but one stood out above all. I'd change the way people see each other, he said, his voice steady. I'd make it so we could understand each other better, so there'd be less fear, less hate. I'd want the world to feel connected, not divided. The keeper was silent for a long moment, its hooded face unreadable. Then, with a wave of its staff, the void dissolved, and the chamber reappeared around them. You have answered truthfully, the keeper said. The knowledge you seek will not come all at once, but the path to it is open to you. Take what you have learned here and carry it forward. The light of the staff dimmed, and the keeper vanished into the shadows. On the pedestal, the book closed, its cover now marked with a single word. Courage. Oliver stared at the book, feeling the weight of the trial lift from his shoulders. He turned to Lena, who gave him a small, approving nod. Come on, she said. There's still more to do. Together, they left the chamber, the tower of knowledge standing tall behind them as they stepped back into the open air. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Oliver felt lighter. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something just as valuable. The will to keep searching. Chapter 13. The Whispering Forest. The tower of knowledge receded into the distance, its gleaming surface slowly swallowed by the horizon. Oliver and Lena trudged onward, the terrain around them softening into rolling fields blanketed in silvery grass. The journey felt lighter now, as if the weight of the trials they'd endured had been replaced by a growing sense of purpose. As dusk settled over the land, the sky turned an iridescent blend of purples and oranges. They reached the edge of a dense forest, its trees towering impossibly high and their trunks knotted with vines that pulsed faintly, as though alive. A soft, constant murmur filled the air, an eerie symphony of whispers that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. This is the Whispering Forest, Lena said, her voice low. It's said that every tree here holds the memory of a life lived. Some say they speak the truth. Others say they weave illusions. Oliver stared at the looming trees. Illusions? Like the Tower of Reflection? Not exactly, Lena replied. The whispers don't reflect your own mind. They're echoes, fragments of something else entirely. Listen too closely, and you might lose yourself in them. Oliver shivered, the unease creeping into his chest. And we have to go through it, don't we? Lena gave a faint smile. It's the only way forward, but we'll need to stay focused. The forest has a way of playing tricks. They stepped beneath the canopy, where the light of the fading sun barely penetrated. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of moss and damp earth. The whispers grew louder as they ventured deeper, swirling around them like 1,000 invisible voices speaking at once. Oliver couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was hypnotic, almost melodic. At first, the path was clear, a winding trail bordered by glowing fungi and pale roots. But as they walked, the forest began to shift. The trees seemed to rearrange themselves when they weren't looking, and the trail would twist unexpectedly, leading them back to where they'd started. "It's like the forest is alive," Oliver muttered, his frustration mounting. "It is," Lena said simply. "Stay close. The forest will try to separate us." As if in response to her warning, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Oliver began to hear fragments of sentences, each voice tugging at his attention. "Why did you leave us?" One voice hissed, filled with sorrow. "You'll never be enough." Another sneered, sharp and cruel. Oliver clenched his fists, trying to block out the voices. But the more he resisted, the louder they became, each one striking a chord of doubt or regret deep within him. "Oliver," Lena's voice cut through the noise, grounding him. "Focus on me. Don't listen to them." He turned to her, nodding. "I'm trying." They pressed on, the forest growing darker and the whispers more insistent. At one point, Oliver thought he saw shadows darting between the trees, their forms vaguely human but too quick to follow. The air grew colder, and the whispers began to coalesce into a single, haunting voice. "Oliver," it called, soft and familiar. He froze. It was his mother's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Oliver, why did you leave?" the voice asked, tinged with sadness. "You could have stayed. You could have helped." Oliver's heart ached. He knew it wasn't real, couldn't be real, but the words struck a nerve. He had left home, left the life he knew, chasing something he didn't fully understand. Was it selfish? Could he have done more? "Don't stop," Lena said urgently, grabbing his arm. "It's not real. The forest is trying to trap you." He nodded, though the pain lingered, and they continued. The whispers didn't relent, but Oliver focused on the sound of Lena's footsteps, using them as a guide. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the whispers faded to a low hum. In the center stood an ancient tree, far larger than any they'd seen before. Its bark was dark and twisted, its branches stretching wide like gnarled arms. At its base was a hollow, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. "This is it," Lena said, "the heart of the forest. Whatever power keeps this place alive. It's in there." Oliver approached the hollow cautiously. Inside, he saw a crystal embedded in the tree's core, its surface swirling with colors that seemed to shift and dance. As he reached out to touch it, a voice resonated in his mind, not a whisper but a commanding presence. "Seeker," it said, deep and resonant, "you have entered the whispering forest and faced its trials. What is it you seek?" "I seek the strength to move forward," Oliver replied, his voice steady, "to face whatever comes next, no matter how difficult." The crystal pulsed with light, and the voice spoke again. "Strength is not found in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to confront it. You have shown courage, but the journey ahead will test you further. Take what you have learned and carry it with you." The light of the crystal grew blinding, forcing Oliver to shield his eyes. When it dimmed, he found himself holding a small shard of the crystal, its surface warm and pulsing faintly. "What is it?" he asked, turning to Lena. "A token," she said, her expression unreadable. "The forest's gift to those who prove themselves. It's a part of the forest's power, and it will guide you when you need it most." As they left the clearing, the forest seemed to part for them, the whispers fading into silence. When they emerged into the open air, the night sky was alive with stars, their light brighter than Oliver had ever seen. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The journey wasn't over, but he was no longer the same person who had stepped into the forest. He had faced its trials and emerged stronger, the shard in his hand a tangible reminder of the strength he carried within. Chapter 14. The City of Echoes. The journey from the whispering forest brought Oliver and Lena to the edge of a sprawling city that shimmered under a perpetual twilight. Its towering spires, made of gleaming obsidian and glass, reflected the deep indigo sky above, while faintly glowing runes ran across every surface. The city exuded an aura of mystery, a blend of the ancient and the advanced. "This is the City of Echoes," Lena said, her voice reverent. It's said to hold the memories of every soul that's ever lived. Time flows differently here. Oliver gazed in awe at the cityscape, its streets bustling with figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as though caught between moments. It's beautiful and eerie. As they stepped into the city, the air grew charged with energy, and Oliver felt a strange sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching him. The figures they passed paid them no mind, their faces blurred and indistinct. "Are they real?" Oliver asked, watching one of the figures disappear into a wall, leaving only a faint ripple. "Echoes," Lena replied, "fragments of the past, caught in this place. The city preserves them, but they're not alive. Not like us." The streets were a labyrinth of twisting alleys and towering archways, each adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift when Oliver looked away. Lena led the way, her steps confident despite the disorienting surroundings. "We need to find the resonant chamber," she explained. "It's the heart of the city, where the echoes converge. If the next piece of the shard is anywhere, it's there." As they ventured deeper into the city, the whispers returned, softer and more fragmented than those of the forest. They drifted through the air like distant conversations, snippets of laughter, cries, and murmurs. Occasionally, Oliver caught his name among them, sending chills down his spine. They reached a grand plaza where a fountain stood, its water glowing faintly. Around it, the echoes moved in a slow, deliberate dance, their movements synchronized as if performing an ancient ritual. "What are they doing?" Oliver asked, unable to look away. "Reliving," Lena said. "The city replays moments from the lives it remembers. This one, it must have been important." As they watched, the echoes' movements grew faster, more chaotic. The whispers swelled, turning into a cacophony of overlapping voices. The ground beneath them trembled. "Something's wrong," Lena said, her voice tense. Before Oliver could respond, the echoes began to converge, their forms twisting and merging into a single, towering figure. Its body was a swirling mass of light and shadow, its face an ever-changing mosaic of features. "Why have you come here?" the figure demanded, its voice a blend of countless tones. Oliver stepped forward, clutching the shard from the whispering forest. "We're seeking the shard of unity. We need it to restore balance, to stop the darkness spreading across the land." The figure loomed closer, its form pulsating. "Balance comes at a cost. To take from the city, you must offer something in return. What will you give?" Oliver hesitated, the weight of the question sinking in. What could he offer that would be equal to what he sought? His thoughts raced, and then he felt Lena's hand on his shoulder. "You've given so much already," she said softly. "Your courage, your determination. Maybe that's enough." The figure's gaze shifted to Lena, its form still shifting and unstable. "Speak truly, traveler. Do you believe this one is worthy?" "I do," Lena said without hesitation. "He's faced trials that would break most people. He's here not for himself but for the world. That kind of resolve is rare." The figure was silent for a long moment, the air around them heavy with anticipation. Then it extended a hand, its fingers forming from the swirling energy. "Place your shard within me," it said, "and take what you seek." Oliver hesitated, then stepped forward. The shard in his hand pulsed as he approached the figure. When he placed it into the figure's palm, a brilliant light erupted, enveloping them both. Images flooded Oliver's mind. Moments from the lives of countless people, their joys and sorrows, victories and defeats. He saw the world through their eyes, felt their emotions as if they were his own. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and in its place was a new shard, glowing with a vibrant energy. Oliver picked it up, feeling its warmth radiate through him. "The shard of unity," Lena said, her voice filled with awe. "You did it." Oliver looked around. The echoes in the plaza had returned to their silent dance, and the whispers had quieted. The city seemed calmer, as if it too had found a measure of peace. "We should go," Lena said. "The city won't hold itself together for long after this." As they left the plaza, the streets seemed to guide them, the labyrinth untangling itself. When they finally emerged from the city, the twilight gave way to the first rays of dawn, the horizon painted with hues of gold and pink. Oliver looked at the shard in his hand, its light reflecting the sunrise. The journey wasn't over, but they were one step closer to their goal. The city of echoes had tested him, but he had emerged stronger, more certain of his purpose. Onward, Lena said with a smile, and together, they pressed forward into the unknown. Chapter 15, The Trial of Shadows. The air was thick with silence as Oliver and Lena stood before the towering gates of the Umbral Chasm, the final marker on the map. The shards they had collected pulsed faintly in Oliver's satchel, resonating with the dark energy of the place. Shadows spilled from the gates like living mist, curling around their ankles and whispering unintelligible words. Lena gripped her staff tightly, her knuckles white. "This is it," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the oppressive stillness. "The heart of the darkness." Oliver nodded, his throat too dry to speak. His hand brushed the pendant at his neck, seeking courage in its cold, metallic surface. He'd worn it for so long it felt like part of him now, though he still didn't fully understand its significance. The shards vibrated in unison, urging him forward. They pushed open the gates together, the ancient hinges groaning in protest. Beyond lay a cavernous chamber, its walls etched with flowing, arcane symbols that glowed faintly in hues of crimson and indigo. The center of the room was dominated by a black, glass-like orb suspended in mid-air, rotating slowly. The darkness it radiated seemed to consume the light, bending it unnaturally. Lena gasped, the core of shadows. Alive! Oliver's stomach churned as he stepped closer. The orb's surface shimmered, and a figure began to take shape within it. A distorted reflection of himself, yet darker, its eyes glowing like embers. The figure stepped out of the orb, solidifying with each step until it stood before them. It was Oliver, and yet not. Finally, the shadowed version of himself said, its voice a haunting echo, "You've come so far, but do you truly understand what you're fighting for?" Oliver swallowed hard. "I'm here to stop you, to bring balance back to the world." The shadow laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Balance? And what of the cost? Have you thought about what it means to destroy me?" Lena stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Enough of your riddles. We know what you are. A corruption, a parasite feeding on this world." The shadow tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "A parasite? Or a necessity? Light cannot exist without shadow. If you extinguish me, what will remain of you?" Oliver's mind raced, the shadow's words burrowing into his thoughts. Was it right? Could there be no light without darkness? He glanced at Lena, seeking reassurance. Her expression was resolute, but the faint tremble in her hand betrayed her own uncertainty. "We have to end this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The shadow raised its arms, and the room plunged into chaos. The symbols on the walls flared with light, and tendrils of shadow lashed out like whips. Oliver and Lena dodged and countered, Lena's magic bursting forth in arcs of light that clashed violently with the darkness. Oliver unsheathed his blade, its edge glowing faintly as if resisting the oppressive shadows. The battle raged, the room transforming into a storm of light and shadow. The shadowed Oliver was everywhere at once, splitting into multiple forms that taunted and attacked from every angle. Each strike Oliver made seemed to pass through empty air, while the shadow's counterattacks grew more relentless. Lena cried out as a tendril wrapped around her ankle, pulling her toward the orb. Oliver lunged, slicing through the tendril with a desperate swing. The shards in his satchel flared brightly, and he suddenly remembered the pendant around his neck. "The shards," he shouted. "They're the key." Lena nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. She thrust her staff into the ground, creating a shield of light that forced the shadow back momentarily. "Then use them. I'll hold it off." Oliver pulled the shards from his satchel, their combined light blinding in the darkness. As he held them aloft, the shadow screeched, its form flickering. "You don't know what you're doing," it snarled. "Destroy me, and you destroy part of yourself." Oliver hesitated, the shards trembling in his hands. Was it telling the truth? Could he risk it? Lena's shield wavered, and she cried out as a tendril broke through, slashing across her arm. "Oliver," she shouted. "Do it! Now!" With a surge of determination, Oliver pressed the shards together. They merged into a single, radiant crystal, its light cutting through the darkness like a blade. He plunged it into the orb, and the world erupted in a cacophony of sound and light. The shadow screamed, its form unraveling into wisps of smoke that were drawn into the crystal. The cavern trembled, and the orb shattered, releasing a blinding wave of energy that knocked Oliver and Lena to the ground. When the light faded, the room was still. The symbols on the walls were dark, and the oppressive weight in the air was gone. Oliver pushed himself up, his body aching, and looked at the crystal in his hand. It was no longer glowing, but it felt warm, pulsing faintly with life. Lena sat up, clutching her injured arm. "Is it over?" Oliver nodded, though a part of him wasn't sure. The shadow's final words echoed in his mind, a lingering doubt he couldn't shake. "For now," he said, helping Lena to her feet. Together, they stepped out of the cavern, leaving the darkness behind. But as they emerged into the light, Oliver couldn't help but wonder, what had they truly unleashed? Chapter 16, Shadows of Revelation. As the first rays of dawn crept through the dense canopy of trees, the group emerged from the shadowy woods. They had crossed into an unfamiliar territory, one where the very air seemed to pulse with an ancient, otherworldly energy. The map that guided them here was almost useless now. Its inked lines failed to capture the labyrinthine intricacies of this new land. Still, the team pressed on, their resolve steeled by the promise of answers and the gnawing dread of what they might uncover. Elara led the way, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her blade. She had become their compass, her uncanny instincts for danger and safe passage growing sharper with every step. Behind her, Nolan adjusted his satchel, filled to bursting with the artifacts and scrolls they had recovered along their journey. He muttered calculations and half-formed theories under his breath, his mind racing ahead even as his feet struggled to keep up. Zara and Kale brought up the rear, their weapons drawn and senses heightened for any sign of an ambush. Trust was a fragile thread between them, but for now it held. They reached a clearing, dominated by a monolithic structure that seemed to erupt from the earth itself. It was neither wholly natural nor entirely constructed, as if it had been summoned into existence by forces beyond comprehension. The stones were black as obsidian, veined with a faint, luminescent green that pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Strange glyphs adorned its surface, glowing faintly as the group approached. "This is it," Nolan whispered, awe-tinged with fear. "The Spire of Echoes." Kale glanced at him. "And you're sure this isn't going to kill us all?" "No," Nolan admitted, "but it's the only way to get the answers we need." Elara stepped closer to the spire, her fingers brushing against the glyphs. They flared brightly at her touch, and she recoiled instinctively. "It's responding to you," Zara observed, her tone measured. "You might be the key to unlocking it." Elara nodded, though unease prickled at the edge of her thoughts. She placed her hand against the glyphs again, this time with deliberate intent. A low hum resonated from within the spire, and the ground beneath them trembled. The glyphs shifted and realigned, forming a pattern that seemed to twist and writhe, defying logic. A doorway materialized in the surface of the spire, outlined by a flickering green light. Beyond it lay a spiraling staircase descending into darkness. "No turning back now," Elara said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. They entered, their footsteps echoing as they descended. The air grew colder, denser, as if the very fabric of reality was thinning. The walls of the staircase were lined with murals depicting scenes of creation and destruction, gods and mortals, triumph and despair. It was a history none of them recognized, yet it felt uncannily familiar. At the bottom of the staircase, they found themselves in a cavernous chamber. A pool of liquid light dominated the center, its surface rippling despite the absence of any disturbance. Around it stood 6 towering statues, each depicting a figure of immense power. A warrior, a scholar, a healer, a trickster, a sage, and a destroyer. The faces of the statues were obscured, their identities lost to time. "This is a nexus," Nolan breathed, his voice trembling. "A convergence of all timelines, all possibilities. And what happens if we tap into it?" Kale asked, his grip tightening on his sword. "We might find the answers we seek," Nolan said. "Or we might unravel everything." Alara approached the pool, drawn by an invisible force. As she gazed into its depths, she saw flashes of visions. Her past, her future, and countless lives she had never lived. It was overwhelming, yet she couldn't look away. The pool seemed to call to her, its light growing brighter, enveloping her entirely. "Alara!" Zara shouted, rushing forward, but an invisible barrier stopped her. Alara's voice echoed through the chamber, calm and resolute. "I understand now." The light faded, and Alara stood before them, transformed. Her eyes glowed faintly, the same green as the spire's glyphs, and her presence seemed to fill the room. She looked at each of them in turn, a quiet sadness in her gaze. "The truth isn't what we hoped it would be," she said, "but it's what we need." Before they could question her further, the chamber began to shake. The statues cracked and crumbled, and the pool's light turned a searing white. The spire was collapsing, its purpose fulfilled. "Run!" Alara commanded, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. They sprinted up the staircase, the walls closing in around them. When they finally emerged into the open air, the spire was gone, leaving nothing but a scorched patch of earth in its place. They stood in silence, the weight of their journey settling over them. "What did you see?" Zara asked, breaking the silence. Alara looked at her, then at the horizon. "Everything. And now we have to decide what to do with it." As the sun rose higher, its light seemed to pierce the shadows that lingered in their hearts. The path ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure. They were no longer the same people who had started this journey, and the world would never be the same again. Chapter 17, Resolution of the Main Quest. The land lay still, a heavy silence settling over the valley. The great tree, now freed from its chains, stood tall and radiant. The shadows that had once cloaked the kingdom in despair were gone, dissolved by the light that poured from the heart of the tree. The once desolate earth was now alive with vibrant life. Fields of wildflowers bloomed, the rivers shimmered, and the sky above had never seemed so clear. Oliver stood before the tree, his hands trembling slightly as he let go of the last seed he had planted. The golden light from the plants spread outward, filling the air with a warmth that was both soothing and humbling. It was as if the earth itself had breathed a sigh of relief, and for the first time in his journey, Oliver could feel the full weight of their success. Yet, the cost of it was not lost on him. He glanced down at his hands. The calluses that had once seemed so natural now felt different. His body ached with exhaustion, the fatigue of the long journey finally catching up with him. Every step, every trial had brought him here, and though he had succeeded in his mission, the toll it had taken on him was undeniable. Lena stood beside him, her expression a mixture of awe and quiet sorrow. She too had given so much. She had fought beside him through the darkest moments, her strength and courage pushing them both forward. But now, as the weight of their victory settled over them, she too could feel the changes that had come over her. The woman who had once been uncertain of her place in the world was now a warrior, a protector, not just of the land, but of herself. "I never thought it would end like this," Lena said softly, her voice tinged with a sense of wonder. "The land, it feels alive again." Oliver nodded, his gaze fixed on the tree. "It is, but the journey, it hasn't been easy." His voice cracked slightly as the realization hit him. "I've given more than I ever thought I could. I'm not sure what's left of me." Lena met his eyes, her gaze steady and understanding. "You've given everything, Oliver, and that's what makes you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Oliver replied, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm just a farmer." Lena smiled, a gentle warmth spreading across her face. "That's why you were chosen. You grow things, life, hope, and love. And you've planted all of those here." Oliver looked back at the great tree, its branches reaching high into the sky, its roots deep within the earth. He could feel its energy pulsing, as though the tree itself were acknowledging him. The kingdom was restored, but the land had given him something in return: a sense of purpose, a new understanding of what it meant to nurture and protect life. The cost of his journey had been high, but it had forged a bond between him and the earth that could never be broken. As the golden light spread further, Oliver could feel the presence of his companions, Fox and Crow, who had fought alongside them, guarding and guiding them through the darkest hours. Fox, ever loyal, padded quietly beside him, while Crow perched on a nearby branch, watching over them with knowing eyes. The shadows that had once threatened to overrun the land were now nothing more than a memory, and in their place stood the promise of renewal. Oliver took a deep breath, the weight on his shoulders lifting, even if only slightly. "What now?" he asked, his voice softer now, less certain. Lena turned to him, her expression serene. "Now we go home. The world is healed, but there is still work to be done. The land needs tending, the people need guidance. And you need rest." Oliver smiled, a faint but genuine smile, though the weariness was still evident in his eyes. "I suppose you're right, but we'll take it one step at a time, together." Lena nodded, taking his hand in hers. Together, and so, as the last of the chains fell away from the great tree, Oliver and Lena made their way back to the valley, where the world awaited them. They had completed their mission, but the journey had changed them both. The future was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure: they would face whatever came next with the same quiet strength, the same love for the land, and the same unyielding resolve that had carried them through the darkness. Chapter 18, Epilogue. Years passed since Oliver and Lena's journey had restored balance to the kingdom. The once shadowed lands had flourished, becoming a beacon of hope and renewal to the surrounding kingdoms. The great tree, now free of its chains, continued to stand as a symbol of resilience, its branches reaching higher with each passing season, as if echoing the growth that had taken place within the hearts of those who had fought to free it. Oliver had returned to Willowbrook, his humble village that had once seemed like the center of his world. The fields that stretched beyond his cottage were now more vibrant than ever. Crops grew in abundance, and the land seemed to hum with life, as though it had absorbed the love and care Oliver had poured into it over the years. He had learned so much in his journey, not just about farming, but about the land, the people, and himself. He had never sought fame or recognition, but word of his deeds had spread far and wide. Travelers came from distant lands to visit Willowbrook, to see the legendary farmer who had saved a kingdom. They marveled at his fields, which seemed to grow with an almost magical vitality. But Oliver always smiled modestly, offering a simple explanation. "I'm just a farmer," he would say, as he always had. Lena, too, had found her place in this new world. She had returned to the land with Oliver, and together they had worked side by side, helping the people of Willowbrook rebuild. She had become a respected leader in the village, known for her wisdom and courage. The uncertainty that had once clouded her heart was now replaced with a quiet confidence. She knew her purpose now: to protect, to guide, and to nurture, just as Oliver had. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the valley was bathed in golden light, Oliver sat on the porch of his cottage, his gaze drifting over the fields. The land he had always loved seemed to speak to him, its whispers of growth now a constant, soothing presence. The breeze carried the scent of the earth, fresh and alive. Lena sat beside him, her hand in his. Together, they watched as the stars began to appear in the evening sky, the same sky that had once seemed so distant and unknown. In the distance, Fox and Crow could be seen, their forms silhouetted against the glow of the horizon. They had become a permanent part of Willowbrook, their companionship now woven into the fabric of the village. "I think we did it, Oliver," Lena said softly, her voice carrying a note of contentment. "The land is whole again, and so are we." Oliver nodded, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. "We did," he agreed. "And maybe the greatest thing we've learned is that even the smallest seed can grow into something extraordinary. Not just in the earth, but in ourselves." The wind rustled through the apple trees that lined their garden, and for a moment, Oliver could have sworn he heard a faint whisper, just like the one that had called him all those years ago. "Thank you, farmer." A smile tugged at the corner of Oliver's lips. He didn't need to look up to know what it meant. The kingdom was restored, the shadows had been pushed back, and the world was a little brighter because of the love he had for the land. The future was still uncertain. There were always challenges ahead, but Oliver was no longer the uncertain boy who had once dreamed of farming. He was a man who had grown through trials and sacrifice, a man who had learned that even the simplest dreams could lead to the greatest adventures. And though he had changed in many ways, his heart still beat with the rhythm of the earth, the same rhythm that had always called to him. As the night settled over Willowbrook, Oliver and Lena stood together, side by side, watching the stars above. The journey had been long, but they had found peace. And in that peace, they knew that the land, the people, and the world they had fought for were in good hands. Their hands. The adventure had ended, but the story of the farmer, the land, and the kingdom would live on, forever in the hearts of those who believed in the power of simple joys, the nurturing of life, and the unyielding love of the earth.